In the early 1990s, the rock scene shifted from hair metal to grunge. One of the up-and-coming bands of that era was the Gits, with the lead singer Mia Zapata. But fame would be fleeting. July 7th, 1993, Mia Zapata would be found dead near an intersection, and her killer would remain unknown for close to 10 years. Well, it's been a while since I talked about a murder that wasn't justified, and I feel if I continue to talk about creepy online people, I might snap. So let's remedy this with a little bit of murder and a case that went unsolved for a little while. There isn't going to be many memes or jokes in this video because of the nature of the crime, but I will try to make it entertaining nonetheless. Mia Catherine Zapata was born on August 25th, 1965. On Wikipedia and some articles, I've read that she was born in Chicago, but others say she was born in Louisville, Kentucky. So I'm going to acknowledge both to cover all bases. But she was raised in the home of America's national treasure, Jim Cornette. Raised in Louisville by two parents who adored her. And she was well off because her parents both had high-level jobs in the television industry. Mia was a bright young girl who had a deep interest in music, including learning to play piano and guitar by age 9. And there is a clip out there of her somewhat playing the guitar, and she wasn't totally good at it.
Nothing like pain to make you all the same. God, I'm not a guitar player, I'm sorry. All right, one more and we're gonna get on to this night. This is mine.
Her passion was more in singing. She was influenced by R&B, punk rock, and the blues. She was also picked on as a child, given the nickname Chicken. She ended up embracing this nickname, even making a t-shirt with a drawn chicken on it. Though at least she was more attractive than the other person that I know with that nickname. In 1984, she packed her things and went to Antioch College in Ohio, which is Florida man's favorite vacation spot, I swear. There she would meet Andy Kessler, who would adopt the stage name Joe Spleen. She would also meet Matt Dresner and Steve Moriarty. They would decide to form a band together with the name Sniveling Little Rat-Faced Gits, which sounds like your average punk band in the 70s and 80s. The name is a reference to a Monty Python sketch. For those of you who do not know who Monty Python is, and if you don't, you might be too young to be watching me, Monty Python was a show on the BBC. It was like Saturday Night Live, except it was actually funny. They ended up shortening the name to the Gits, which still sounds like a generic punk band. What is a Git anyways? Hang on. A term of insult denoting an unpleasant, silly, incompetent, annoying, senile, elderly, or childish person. Oh good, not a swear word. The YouTube overlords are not going to demonetize this video for me saying git a lot, hopefully. Also, I'm going to totally use that word from now on. Git. It sounds so awesome. Anyways, by the early 90s, the music scene was changing. The hair metal of the 80s was going way out of style. Thank God. I am pretty sure that all that hairspray mixed with pyrotechnics is a fire hazard, and probably not good to breathe in and bad for the environment. Pop music was on a downslide due to a couple of instances of lip syncing, along with the whole issue of Milli Vanilli. If you have never heard of that controversy, I will just say this. The dudes in Milli Vanilli were not really singing their songs. They were pretty much just stand-ins for the real artists because they were sexier, and they won a Grammy. I just got a little sidetracked, I apologize. Instead of bands getting popular in LA or New York, Seattle became the hub of a new movement called grunge. Off the success of bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and others, many up-and-coming bands decided to move to Seattle to try to get noticed by record labels. And the Gits were no different. They moved there, rented a place in an area of Seattle called Capitol Hill, and it was a place they called the Rat House. Mia could have just used her parents' money to help her at this point. I'm sure her parents would have supported her, but Mia was an independent woman, the type that would earn everything she had. And she was the type of artist who cared more about the art than making money off of the art. She wanted to perform. She didn't care about fame and fortune. To help pay bills, she took a job at a restaurant as a dishwasher. This allowed a more flexible schedule, as the band played more gigs around the Seattle area, and they ended up with quite a local following, including a medical examiner who will come up later. In 1992, the band released their debut album. It was called Frenching the Bully, which is a really weird name, but okay. With this, they began touring outside the Seattle area, including touring in Europe. They opened for bands like Nirvana, Mudhoney, and of all people, Beck. One of these things is not like the other. While they were just the opening act, it signaled that they were on their way. The album Frenching the Bully was released off of CZ Records, which was a Seattle-based record company. But major labels began to eye them also. Mia herself during this time was going through some things. Nothing too hardcore, but it's important to talk about. Mia had developed a drinking problem, but the band had a strict policy of not drinking till the gig was done, which she kept to. The problem was, she would go hard after the gig. She did dabble in the occasional drug use, but her vice was drinking. The band thought of her like a sister and were worried about her, so they all got together with her and asked her to cut back. And she did, not drinking during their European tour. She also was dealing with a breakup with her boyfriend at the time she returned to Seattle. But during all of this, they were also recording for their follow-up album, an album that would eventually be called Enter the Conquering Chicken. There, Mia wrote a particular song called The Sign of the Crab, a song about being murdered by a serial killer. Here are some lines. Anything to get me in and then get me killed. Go ahead and slice me up. Spread me all across this town, because you know you're the one that won't be found. Maybe I've pushed my luck too many times. Now you've taken it upon yourself to put me back in line. Well, leave it to fear to get the message through. But isn't that the romance that brought me here to you? This song is chilling because of what would happen to Mia Zapata. In the early morning hours of July 7th, 1993, a woman was walking down a street in Seattle, Washington. As she walked, she stumbled upon a body laying in the street. Right leg over her left leg, arm stretched out. The hood of a Gits hoodie pulled down over her face, in what Unsolved Mysteries famously called a Christ-like pose.
Around 2 a.m., Mia Zapata left a friend's apartment. An hour later, her body was found 2 miles away, reportedly laying face up in an almost Christ-like pose.
What was more chilling is where she was found. On one side of the street was a Catholic community church. On the other side of the street was a church called the Bethel Church. The woman walked to a local firehouse and informed the firemen inside of the body laying on the street. The body was of a woman. There were ligature marks on her neck, suggesting that she had been strangled with a string from the hoodie. She had been R-worded, assaulted, and strangled to death. A medical examiner on the scene immediately knew who she was. He had been a fan of the Gits, and when he saw the woman's face, he knew she was Mia Zapata. Earlier that night, Mia had been out with others, drinking at the Comet Tavern. She then walked to a friend's home that didn't live far away. She also was looking to speak with her ex-boyfriend, who was another musician in a different band that she was doing some sessions with. The friend asked her to stay the night, but Mia decided to walk as she didn't have a driver's license. Putting on headphones and listening to music on a Walkman. This happened around 2 a.m. She was found at 3:30 a.m. She had a bite mark on her breast. It was shallow, but it was there. The medical examiner swabbed it. At that time, saliva wasn't enough for a DNA test, but the medical examiner had the forethought to keep this for the future. And it will come into play later, as this was what caused the killer to be found. But that was almost 10 years later, but we'll get there. Mia had tried to put up a fight. She had defensive wounds and a lacerated liver. But because of the level of beating she suffered, if she hadn't been strangled, she still would have died from the internal injuries she suffered. Next to her body were tire marks, suggesting that she had been dumped there. At first, investigators thought, because of the way the body was posed and the area that it was found in, that there had to be a religious motive behind the killing. And it is going to get weirder with the religious symbolism later. But for now, just know that there wasn't much evidence at the scene. She had been dumped there. She had been R-worded and murdered at a different location. Because investigators didn't have much to go on, their suspect pool could have been anyone, with a focus on people that she knew, as she would not have gotten into the car of a stranger. So her bandmates were questioned, her friends were questioned, her ex-boyfriend was questioned. All had alibis and no reason to harm someone they cared about.
And it got to the point where there was nobody left to look at. And at that point, that's when you get concerned.
This also had an impact on the music scene in Seattle, as Mia was friends with a lot of local bands, like members of an all-girl band called 7 Year Bitch, which I wish that band had made it big. I would have loved to hear how they would have announced it on the radio, but even people close to her began to suspect that she was murdered by someone she knew, which added a level of paranoia to bands that were once friendly to each other, and threatened to split up this close-knit community. Investigators also thought that the Green River Killer might have had a hand in Mia's death, but that was quickly ruled out. So with little to go on, Seattle police turned to the public for information. Issue is, they left out some things, including that she had been R-worded. I get holding back information. That way when you get to question the suspect, if they blurt out something that only the murderer would know, then they're dead to rights. But withholding from the public that she was R-worded is dumb in my opinion. The public should know at least a summary of the situation if they are to help the police track down a killer. Either way, the investigation became a cold case, and was soon featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, which back in the 90s, Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted were two shows that helped cases get solved. And I remember this episode in particular because I watched it. And the image of an actress playing Mia Zapata, dead in the pose that she was left in, gave me nightmares. I was only a kid, so yes, I'm old, shut the hell up. Anyways, when the police fail, there are other avenues that someone can take to find justice. And I'm not talking about putting on a spandex suit, beating up criminals, and proclaiming yourself to be Batman. I'm talking about legal means. Enter the Conquering Chicken was released posthumously, and a lot of the proceeds went to funding a private investigator to supplement the police investigation.
We decided to hire our own private investigator, and we didn't have money, but we were going to find the money, and we were going to make sure that this got solved immediately.
There were no eyewitnesses, and believe me, I tried. I went out a couple of nights with another investigator and talked with every prostitute on the street to see if anybody knew anything. I talked with all the neighbors in the area. People saw a car drive away, but they didn't see anybody in it around that time.
Lee Heron was hired to help find Mia's killer. At the same time, benefit concerts were being organized to help pay the PI to continue her work. Bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden all took the time to perform for these concerts. And I swear Eddie Vedder loves causes. Between this and the West Memphis 3, he has provided a lot of time for noble causes, which is probably why I love Pearl Jam. Another person who came out to support efforts in finding the killer of Mia Zapata and bringing them to justice was Joan Jett.
It really had to be devastating, you know? So I really think it's admirable what they did, and I think Mia would be proud of them, what they did.
The amount of bands that got involved, which was the Posies, Presidents of the United States, Nirvana, when Kurt was alive, Eddie Vedder, Soundgarden, and they all brought things. I think Soundgarden lent us some of the equipment, like the drums and whatnot.
I wanted to do the music proud. I wanted to do a good job. I wanted to raise a lot of money, you know, to make sure, you know, we were able to give the Private Eye something good. And
who recorded an album with the surviving members of the Gits called Evil Stig, which is Gits live backwards.
Guys in the Gits called to see if I would be interested. They were doing some benefit stuff to raise money for Private Eye.
It somehow came up in the studio with Joan, and she's just like, we got to do something. We got to be involved.
I think somehow we got around to talking about playing some of the Gits songs.
Next thing you know, she's like singing the Gits songs with the surviving members of the Gits.
But this was worth it, because for 3 years, Lee Heron looked into leads. She worked with police to try to find answers. At one point, she came across a story from that night about a man who wanted to give a woman a ride. When she got closer, she noticed he was choking the chicken in his front seat. It was one of many leads that Lee Heron investigated that either turned out to be a dead end, or turned out that she needed more information before she could proceed further. After 3 years, the case was a cold case. The money had dried up, and while others would have moved on, Lee Heron didn't. She continued to work the case pro bono. But Mia's death also inspired bands and artists to start Home Alive, an organization based in Seattle, with the goal of teaching self-defense and ways to make sure you're not accosted on the street. At the time of Mia's murder, the Seattle scene didn't have much of self-defense classes. The belief was that if Mia knew how to defend herself better, she would have been able to make it home alive. This is an amazingly positive thing that came in the midst of a tragedy and proved that musicians do care for their community and one another. Soon DNA technology would get better, and even with a small amount of saliva, a killer would be found. Let's backtrack a little. In 1993, Kary Mullis won a Nobel Prize for his work in DNA. In 1983, he began working on developing a way to copy existing DNA. By 1993, polymerase chain reaction was not fully perfected yet, but the way of doing it was available. Forensic experts could have used the saliva from the Mia Zapata case to try to extract a DNA profile, but that risked destroying the sample, so they waited until the technology was more advanced to do so. In 2001, the time was right.
Well, with PCR, what you have is this chemical photocopier. So we were able to amplify that small piece of DNA up into large enough pieces that we can actually detect.
And they were able to successfully extract DNA from the bite mark on Mia's breast. They loaded it into CODIS and hoped for a result, and they didn't get one. Either the killer hadn't been caught yet, or his DNA wasn't on file. Either way, they had an unidentified male DNA sample they could use. But something happened in 2002, in Florida of all places. In Florida, a man was arrested on a burglary and domestic abuse charge. A Cuban man who came over to this country during the Mario boat lift, which happened in 1980, where Fidel Castro allowed Cubans onto boats to leave the country. Some left to try to find a better place for their families. Others left because they were criminals trying to escape the Cuban criminal justice system. And the man who killed Mia Zapata was one of those criminals. He had a violent history of burglary, harming women, and many reports from his ex-girlfriends and wives. Now here comes the chilling part. Remember back how Mia was found? In a Christ-like pose between two churches? The man's name was Jesus Misquia. This gives a new level of fucked up to this story, and that is my one F-bomb per video. He was also the person that had tried to get a girl in his car while polishing the knob. He had briefly lived in Seattle before going back to Florida, and with his DNA on Mia's body, they had him dead to rights. So you would think because it is law enforcement, and they have what they need to send him to prison, that this would happen.
FBI, open up!
But no, instead it was more like this.
This Calvin and Hobbes is funny. Oranges, sir. Take some oranges. You want some oranges? No. No, we got lime. We got lime. Solid, sir. No thanks. Good luck. God. For his turkey cemetery. Oh.
Florida police staked out his home, but noticed that he hadn't come out in a while because he wasn't there. They lost him. In truth, he had gone to Miami to help on a fishing boat. As Seattle police arrived, Jesus Misquia showed up as well. He thought that he was only going to be taken in for questioning on his probation charges. He was in a world of shock when he was charged with murder.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
In 2003, he was sentenced to 37 years in prison. He ended up appealing this decision. But hold on, before you throw your desk and yell that shit was unfair, the judge ruled that he be placed in prison for 36 years, and he would never see the outside of a prison cell again, because he would die in prison on January 21st, 2021.
Give it back! Return that yet.
Mia Zapata's death caused paranoia in her friends, but brought them together to find justice for her. Her life was fleeting, a member of the 27 Club, but she is remembered by those who knew her as an intelligent, funny, and kind-hearted person. A person who would rather buck the system and follow her own path than to rest on her privileges. Someone who wanted to share her artistic expression with the world. To this day, though they only have 2 albums with her and disbanded soon after, there are people who listen to the Gits. 32,858 regular listeners on Spotify. While she is mostly remembered by how she was murdered, it is important to remember she was a human being with a life that most would have dreamed to have. opening for huge bands of her era, traveling, being friendly to those who got to know her, introverted offstage, extroverted on it. She was called Chicken. She didn't let that get to her and embraced it. While justice took nearly 10 years, it isn't because the police didn't try. It wasn't bungled. It just there wasn't much to tie anyone to the crime. Only a single saliva sample that at the time could not be used to extract DNA. But this proves, with time, justice can be served. As technology gets better, a lot of unsolved crimes can be solved. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. If you like my videos, consider subscribing. If you want to support me, I have memberships activated and a Patreon. Links in the description. Till next time.